My wife Iris sat on the couch next to me, holding the bowl of popcorn in her thin hands. On our other side, our little boy, Freddy, sat. He looked just like his mother with the same dirty blonde hair and faraway eyes, like the eyes of a dreamer. The movie played across our flat-screen TV, some CGI comedy with talking penguins and llamas that could drive cars. It was some garbage from Disney that I would have never watched in a million years, but Freddy liked it, so I suffered through it for him. We had turned off all the lights in the house for the movie. Only the TV's flickering colors illuminated the room, sending dancing shadows that flashed out behind us. Suddenly, outside the living room window, a bolt of lightning came down from the sky, splitting a tree in our front yard in two. Light flooded in through the window as if the flash of a nuclear missile were ripping its way across the town. A crash rang out as the tree split down the middle, its massive branches tumbling down onto the lawn. I jumped as the ground shook. More lightning flashed nearby, hitting other houses and lawns on the street. There wasn't supposed to be any storms, I said in surprise. The TV had gone black, and now we sat in darkness. For a long moment, I thought that the power had gone out. Abruptly, it came back on with a roar of white noise and a flickering of static. The volume seemed to be increasing by itself, growing into a rushing cacophony like a waterfall. I saw Iris try to scream something, but I could only see her lips move. As suddenly as it had all started, it stopped. The standard "please stand by" screen with a rainbow of blocky colors behind it appeared. There was a clanging, ringing sound that emanated from the speakers, high-pitched and whining. And then text started appearing across the screen. At the same time, a deep, serious voice spoke in the background, like a radio announcer reporting on the death of a president. "This is the Cryptid Emergency Alert Broadcast System." The voice read grimly. "This is not a test. Level 5 activity has been reported in your area. Do not go outside. Close all blinds, shutters, and windows. Lock all doors and close any attached garages. Do not open your doors except to military or police personnel with the proper insignia. Even if someone appears to be in distress, do not open your door to investigate or try to intervene in any way. A temporary quarantine is in effect for your area. Military and police assistance is on the way. To ensure the greatest chances of survival during this time of crisis, please abide by the following rules. 1. If blood begins to pour under your door, go to a higher floor immediately. Avoid physical contact with the blood at all costs. 2. All legitimate military and police personnel will have a special insignia on their helmets and jackets, an eye contained in a double-thumbed fist. Only accompany them if they have this insignia, otherwise they are imposters. 3. Avoid mirrors for the duration of the emergency. The voice cut out abruptly, slowing down in a mechanical whine. Static started flashing across the TV, covering the "please stand by" message that had returned in blocky letters. At that moment, the lights went out. They came back on a couple of seconds later, brightening and dimming before the power had failed again. This time, the electricity did not come back on. "What the heck?" Iris whispered next to me, taking out her phone and shining the light across the dark living room. "That was pretty weird. Everything looks different outside too. I was outside an hour ago and the moon didn't look anything like that." She pointed. I got up, realizing that she was right. The nighttime sky outside looked strange. I looked out the front window, seeing the moon was cast in a fluorescent orange light. The cloudless sky had a dark red glow to it, as if some kind of eerie smog had covered everything. I had seen similar things happen after massive forest fires in the past. "What happened, Dad?" Freddy asked in a small voice. "Where's the movie?" "Oh, I think we lost power, little man," I said, ruffling his hair in a nonchalant manner. I didn't really believe the emergency broadcast after all. I figured some teenager had hacked the TV station and decided to play a prank. Or perhaps some disgruntled employee had done it on his last day as a kind of a screw you to the station. I had heard of similar things happening before. It was somewhat strange how the power had gone out and the sky had changed, but I felt sure that it all could be logically explained. Someone shrieked outside. I looked out onto the dark street, seeing the silhouette of somebody running frantically down the middle of the street, zigzagging wildly. As the figure got closer, I realized it was a young woman. She looked like she was in her mid-20s. She wore a white shirt and khakis. Her clothes were soaked in streams of blood that made the fabric cling to her body. I saw a vicious gash bitten into her left shoulder, a wound so deep that the white bone peeked out through the ragged patches of flesh. "Help me," she wailed, her eyes wild and panicked. "Why won't anyone help me?" She staggered and fell forward, crying and bleeding all over the road. I was about to run outside to see what was wrong with the young woman when I saw another silhouette creeping up behind her. It looked to be the body of a man, but something was wrong. As he drew closer, I caught a glimpse of the man's face through the dim light. The left side of it was rotted and decayed, while the right looked muscular and healthy. He wore a black suit that looked little more than tatters. Pieces of it fell off in ragged strips. I could see his left hand was also decomposing. Whatever kind of sickness it was, it seemed to extend to the whole left side of his body. The stiff, skeletal leg cracked as he dragged it behind him, silently drawing nearer to the young woman. The living side of his face split into an insane grin as he looked down at us. He carried a blood-stained axe that dragged on the pavement behind him with a harsh, metallic groan. "Get away from me!" The woman screamed at the abomination, trying to kick at him, but she looked weakened from blood loss and her attempts were feeble and slow. The man laughed, a sound that rang out like the gurgling of blood. He spat bugs from his mouth onto the dark street below. He knelt down before the gasping woman and gave her a low whisper. It carried on the dead, silent air. "So warm," he murmured, wiping his dead, putrefying fingers across the streams of blood that spurted from her left shoulder. He stuck an inhumanly long pointed tongue out of his chattering lips and began to lick the blood off of his hands. But not enough. Not nearly enough. He stuck the bony, decaying fingers of his left hand into the wound and started pulling at it. Red bubbled out in increasing quantities, covering her body in its wet sheen. The woman jerked, her face turning pale and bloodless. She tried to kick at him, but he only laughed again, gurgling like a man with a cut throat. In horror, I watched him raise the axe above his head. It stood there for a long moment, trembling in his shaking hands like a guillotine blade. "Please, don't," the woman pleaded as he grinned down at her. In a blur, he swung the axe down into her forehead. There was a wet cracking and ringing of metal. She sat there with her mouth open for what felt like a very long moment, and then limply collapsed to the pavement. A dull thud echoed down the street as her head smacked the ground. Sickened, I closed the blinds on the window and turned away, realizing that Freddy and Iris had been standing right behind me the entire time, watching the horrific display. Freddy was crying quietly into his hands, while Iris looked pale, her green eyes wide and unbelieving. The woman exhaled one last time, a long, drawn-out death rattle, and then everything went silent. I felt sick and weak. Staggering, I put my hand out against the wall. A wave of nausea rose up in my stomach. I ran towards the bathroom, shining the light from my cell phone to light the way. Iris started crying. I heard her frantically trying to dial 911 over and over again. "Nothing's working," she cried. I stumbled into the bathroom and threw up all the popcorn and soda that I had consumed that night into the toilet. Covered in sweat, I started wiping my face with toilet paper. I pushed myself up, glancing into the mirror. A cadaverous version of myself stood there, the dead face showing horror and surprise just like my own. I saw the same high cheekbones, the same shaved head, but in the mirror image, bugs writhed and squirmed in the flesh. I backpedaled into the wall, stuttering something incomprehensible. The reflected image did the same, his lipless mouth opening and closing with silent curses. He wore the same clothes as myself, a black t-shirt and blue jeans, but they were rotted and tattered as if they had been dug out of a grave. "What the heck?" I said, raising my right hand experimentally. The mirror image did the same, matching every single movement perfectly. At that moment, Iris came running into the bathroom, her soft footsteps thudding gently against the marble floor. I jumped, turning to her. "There's somebody outside the door," she whispered, her face pale. I glanced back at the reflection, seeing that the other version was no longer following my movements. "Watch out!" I cried, but it was too late. The skull-like face came forward in a blur. His arm shot out towards Iris, and the surface of the mirror swirled as if it were made of water when his pale flesh made contact with it. The sharp points of bone on his fingers wrapped around Iris's neck. Stunned and silent, I watched in horror as he started dragging her into that other world. "Stop him," she screamed. "God, make him stop." I ran forward, grabbing her legs as her head and chest was sucked through. There was a slight popping sound when her body had entered the liquid-like surface. I tried to hold on with all of my strength, but whatever abomination was on the other side was strong, much stronger than me. His iron grip yanked her out of my hands. "Dad?" Freddy asked, slinking into the bathroom. His eyes were wide and wild. He looked around confused. "Where's Mom, and who's screaming?" I had to make a decision instantly, I knew. I could either stay with my son or try to get my wife back. I knew that I couldn't just leave Iris, though. I felt mentally torn. I looked between him and the mirror, my heart quivering with anxiety. "Freddy, go wait in the living room. Hide behind the couch. Don't answer the door or say anything to anyone no matter what. I'll be right back." I wasn't sure if I would or not. Before I turned to the mirror, I patted his head. "Remember the rules they read us on the TV." He nodded, but he was only a 7-year-old boy. How much did he really understand? Heck, how much did I even understand? I hadn't followed the rules, and now Iris was taken. I turned back to the mirror, seeing that I had no reflection now. There was no sign of Iris or the rotted corpse with my face. Slowly, I walked forward, putting my trembling hand out towards its silvery surface. My fingers went through the mirror as if it were mere air, but I felt something freezing cold ripple around my skin. Pins and needles rushed up my arm. Taking a deep breath in, I pushed myself up on the counter and went all the way through. I fell forward onto the marble surface of the bathroom floor, putting my hands out to break the fall. As I glanced up, I realized how strange everything looked. The world here was in constant motion, as if a fog-like void shimmered over the world. The floor's surface danced with whirls of shadow. They felt as freezing cold as liquid nitrogen as they passed over my body. Shivering and hugging myself, I pushed myself up off the floor. The walls and ceilings too rippled in these same black currents. I glanced around, seeing the white bathtub filled to the brim with dark blood. It bubbled constantly as if someone was drowning under its surface. Bloody handprints of all sizes smeared the sides of the tub. The smell of copper grew strong, mixing with the strange smell that emanated from the shadows, a pungent chemical odor like ammonia. I passed by the mirror, seeing that here too I had no reflection. I felt like a vampire staring into that blank emptiness, feeling sick and disoriented. I stumbled forward, afraid to even breathe too loudly. I heard Iris crying and shrieking somewhere nearby. "No, please stop." Her voice seemed to be growing fainter and weaker, as if she were being dragged away by a tsunami. I peeked around the corner. Everything looked like nightmarish and strange. The living room looked much longer, stretching out for hundreds of feet. It had the same blue carpet and white walls as the one in my world, but now it was the size of a football stadium. The dark red couch had lengthened to an absurd size, stretching wide enough to fit 100 people in it. The TV loomed across the room like the screen of a movie theater. It flickered constantly, showing a cacophony of white noise and static interspersed with horrible images. But none of that was what made an involuntary gasp of horror rise up in my throat. It was the enormous spider web spanning the length of the ceiling, fluttering softly in the breeze. In the center of the symmetrical web, I saw Iris, covered in silky thread up to her neck. She was hanging horizontally facing down, her body parallel to the floor. She struggled against the webbing that bound her like steel chains. Her eyes bulged from her head as she stared fixatedly at the cadaver approaching her. Crawling upside down towards Iris was the monstrous image of myself that I had seen in the mirror, but he had transformed into something spidery and eldritch. He skittered along with 4 arms and 4 legs now. The emaciated limbs poked out of his tattered rags of clothes, forked and elongated, the skin pale and covered in purple sores and deep gashes. Iris continued to plead and shriek in horror as it drew near. The creature's chattering fangs and blackened gums approached her neck. At the penultimate moment, Iris saw me peeking around the corner of the bathroom. I stood there unsure of what to do. I thought of trying to scream out to throw something at the creature, but then what? We would both die, and then who would be left alive to protect Freddy? I didn't know what to do. These thoughts passed through my head in the space of a single moment as we stared at each other. Her eyes shone with a moment of clarity, even as waves of mortal terror shook her body like a hurricane. "Save Freddy! Run! Go, Jack!" The creature noticed her staring at me instantly. He curved his long neck and twisted his spidery limbs, clutching the thick strands of silk with skeletal limbs. The creature turned to me. He had a face like a skull. His filmy eyes regarded me intently. Silver streams of saliva dripped from his mouth. He gave a wide and insane smile, and then turned back to Iris, unhinging his jaw. The pale, dead skin tore with a wet, ripping sound. The yellow sharp points of teeth gleamed darkly in the currents of rippling shadow. I turned, sprinting back into the darkness of the bathroom as the crunching of bone and the shrieking of my wife followed me out. I had to repress an urge to vomit. With all the speed that I could muster, I staggered forward to the counter where the mirror sat, revealing the image of my house, an image that still lacked my reflection inside. Iris's pleas and screams rapidly weakened. I heard her choking and gasping. A few minutes later, I heard a rapid skittering of many legs approaching the bathroom. I started to pull myself up on the counter to escape this mirror world. Something creaked in the doorway behind me. I glanced back in fright, seeing the abomination with the 8 limbs creeping up behind me. He stood only a few feet away from me now. As my eyes met his white, dead ones, his cadaverous face split into a sickly grin. A wave of adrenaline shook my body. My vision turned white in the darkness. With a pounding heart, I pushed myself up and lunged through the mirror. The 8-limbed abomination with my rotting face gave an insane shriek. I felt a freezing cold hand wrap around my ankle and begin to drag me back. "No!" I shrieked, trying to kick blindly at the mirror creature's dead face. "I'll never go with you, never!" I smashed my sneaker into his jaw. There was a shattering sound as if a ceramic vase had been dropped. The chattering of sharp teeth and the shrieking cut off abruptly. Looking back, I saw the corpse's broken jaw hanging on by only a few shreds of tendon and muscle. The eyes went slack and I felt the grip loosen for the briefest moment. I pushed myself forward and slid through the mirror. The freezing cold, pins and needles sensation returned, running over my body like water. I collapsed headfirst onto the sink, rolling onto the floor with a jarring thud. The shrieking of the eight-limbed corpse continued behind me. I saw him trying to force his elongated body through the mirror. The long arms with their sharp fingers reached through, swiping wildly at the air. Before I could escape, one of them came through and cut 4 deep gashes into my chest. My shirt instantly became soaked in blood as a burning pain ran up my body. I heard somebody pounding at the front door, but in the panic of the moment, I could barely think. As the rest of the cadaverous body tried to push his way through the mirror, I dragged myself out of the bathroom. I slammed the door shut, even as the sounds of breaking and shattering followed me out of the bathroom. Ignoring the pain radiating through my body, I ran over to the couch and began shoving it towards the door. The door shuddered in its frame. The house and the floor shook as the corpse threw its enormous body into the wood over and over again. Cracks spiderwebbed down the front of it, and I knew it wouldn't last more than a couple more seconds. "Freddy!" I screamed, looking around frantically. My heart dropped when I remembered that I had told him to hide behind the couch. He wasn't here or anywhere in the living room. "Freddy, where are you?" "Dad?" A voice responded from outside. It sounded like Freddy's voice, but it was eerie, as if his voice had gotten caught between stations on the radio. It sputtered with static. It fell and rose in an ear-splitting scream. "Dad, let me in, please, they're going to hurt me." I ran to the front door looking outside, but I saw no sign of Freddy. The sky had changed though. The moon had changed from orange to a dark red, the color of a bursted blood blister. The rest of the sky was such a dark shade of crimson that it looked almost black. Around my feet, I felt something warm and wet. "Where are you?" I yelled. "I don't see." In that moment, the bathroom door exploded outwards in a shower of splinters, covering my face and body in the debris. The cadaverous face peeked around the corner, as if he were playing hide-and-seek rather than hunting and killing. "Come on," I said as I looked down, seeing blood streaming in from under the door. It covered my sneakers up to the tops of these soles as more and more flooded in. I ran for the stairs as the eight-limbed corpse skittered across the ceiling like a spider. He hung upside down, the jaw hanging askew of his putrefying skull, the filmy eyes flashing with bloodlust. I was already halfway up the stairs when the corpse jumped down into the lake of blood at the bottom of the stairs. With his elongated and twisted limbs, he began pulling himself towards the first step, covering his body in the thick putrid blood that continuously poured in through the bottom of every door. But something was in the blood, I saw to my horror. I froze in place near the top of the stairs, watching the creature as he struggled to pull himself out of it, which it was already at knee height and still rising. There were dark silhouettes slithering through the blood. I saw the head of a black snake peer out at the eight-limbed cadaver. The snake had no eyelids and its eyes looked as red as the blood that it lived in. It wrapped its muscular body around his torso, rising up towards the cadaver's face. The blood-red eyes met those dead, rotten ones of the corpse as they stared at each other, and then the eldritch snake lunged forward and bit off the corpse's face. Other snakes started to rise out of the surface, wrapping around his forelegs and slithering up his back. The corpse wailed like a banshee, running blindly into the walls to try and smash the many snakes that suffocated and bit him from all sides. But this only seemed to heighten their hunger and bloodlust. The sound of shredding flesh and snapping bone followed me as I ran into Freddy's room and hid. His room was the only one without mirrors in it, I knew, and I wouldn't be making that mistake again. In the thick curtains of shadow, a small voice rang out, terrified and searching. "Dad, is that really you?" Freddy asked, hiding behind his chest of toys. I saw a small body contorted and pale, his little head poked above the lid. "Freddy, you're alive," I cried, running over and hugging him. Tears streamed down my face. I thought you were outside. I heard you screaming out there." "Well, I heard you and Mom yelling outside too," Freddy whispered, his small body trembling as I held him. "I got scared and ran up here. I'm sorry, Dad. Where's Mom at, though?" "Hey, it's okay. Thank God you did," I murmured, remembering the lake of blood downstairs and all those strange black snakes. "Mom isn't coming back, Freddy." He went silent and then didn't ask any more questions. A sick, heavy weight covered my heart. In the darkness, we hid and waited, though I knew not for what. The smell of copper and iron from all the blood downstairs had become overwhelming. After a few minutes of this, I took my phone out and I shone it around experimentally. I saw a thin layer of blood streaming into the room, rising up the stairs like the waves of a tsunami. It covered the hallway's hardwood floor, a half-inch thick deep already and growing fast. Dark shapes slithered and writhed in it. Small waves pushed the lake of blood towards us, and within seconds, my shoes were submerged in it. "Dad?" Freddy asked in a panicked voice. "What's that? There's things inside of it." Without thinking, I picked Freddy up and I held him above my body. "We need to get to the attic," I whispered to him, sprinting through the rising pool of blood with my son in my arms. "Don't be afraid, Freddy. We'll make it." I had nearly reached the hallway where the pole cord for the attic stairs hung when something wrapped itself around my feet. I went flying forwards, dropping Freddy in the pool. He was submerged up to his waist instantly. His small body writhed in terror. Help me," he screamed, flailing his arms as black snakes circled him like hungry sharks. The one wrapping around my legs continued slithering up my body. A rising sense of horror and panic filled me. At that moment, I knew that I was doomed. I only hoped that I would see Iris again. And then I noticed spotlights turn on outside, filling the inside of the house with a radiance like the sun. All of the windows upstairs suddenly smashed inwards. A spotlight shone through the nearest of them, illuminating me and Freddy in our frantic struggles against the snakes. Men in SWAT gear crawled through these shattered windows. With their gas masks, their faces looked like insects with too many compound eyes. On their helmets and jackets, I saw a strange symbol, a double-fisted thumb holding a staring and lidless eye. Dozens of them streamed in, shooting the snakes that circled Freddy and me. As the one wrapping around its body slowly wound its way towards my face, one of the black-clad men came up behind it and shot it in the skull. The snake's body collapsed all around me, its muscles loosening in death. With relief washing over me, I ran to our saviors. "Get us out of here," I pleaded. The man nodded in his black military gear, his mask revealing nothing. "Follow me," he said dispassionately, starting towards the roof. "You two are the only survivors we've found so far. Truly is a miracle that anybody's still alive." I could only agree silently. "This must be all over the news then," I said. The masked man shook his head. "No one knows about this," he responded. "No one but you two in our group. The media won't say anything. They do what we tell them." I followed the man out onto the roof. Helicopters crisscrossed the skies, illuminating the houses and streets with many bright spotlights. As a helicopter slowly lowered itself down to take Freddy and me away from that pit of nightmares, dropping a rope for us to ascend, I glanced around my town one last time. Many of the houses were destroyed or burning, sending thick clouds of black smoke into the blood-red sky. Men in full SWAT gear zoomed around the blood, flooding the streets and boats, the whirring of the motors echoing like angry hornets. Turning away, I followed Freddy into the helicopter and never returned. Iris is dead, and Freddy and I have seen enough horrors to scar us for 1,000 years. In my heart, I know that it's my fault that my wife died. I didn't follow the rules, and she had to pay the price for my mistake. I will hear those dying, panicked screams until my final breath. Our team had been working hard on Project Ghost Machine for years when the breakthrough finally took place. I came into work that morning sipping a cup of coffee as I passed by the security guard at the front entrance. Dozens of men and women in suits and white lab coats stood in the hallway, chattering together in a low susurration. I walked toward a colleague of mine, Dr. Harper. He pushed up his black-rimmed glasses and gave me a crooked smile. "Hey boss, did you hear the news?" he whispered, running a hand over his crew cut. I shook my head. "I just got here," I said. I motioned to all the people gathered around. "What is this?" He leaned so close to me that I could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his breath. Project Ghost Machine had a breakthrough last night, about 7 hours ago. Our little robot friend seems to have achieved a level of consciousness. I scoffed at that. How can anyone tell? No one can know what goes on in the mind of a computer, I retorted. We can't even know what goes on in the minds of humans except for ourselves. Well, not to get into any deep philosophical discussions about solipsism and mind-body duality here, but it absolutely smashes the Turing test. No one could tell whether it was a human or a computer speaking when they sent it questions, and it claims to be self-aware. Before last night, it could mimic some answers, but it never could have passed the Turing test. Now, however, he shook his head. It's amazing. It's like it evolved exponentially in a few hours. Whether it has actually developed a true consciousness or whether it has simply reached the point where it can convincingly replicate human consciousness, he shrugged. Well, does it really matter? The result is the same from our perspective. If it walks like a duck and squawks like a duck after all. I pushed past him, making my way through the crowd. Dr. Harper followed close behind. "Let's go and talk to it then," I said. "I need to see this for myself." The quantum supercomputer took up an entire room. I saw the flashing blue circuits and whirring cooling fans through the glass partition. Tubes of liquid nitrogen crisscrossed the cage-like metal exterior to keep the computer from overheating. Nobody was allowed inside without a special suit, since even static electricity from human skin touching the circuitry could affect the quantum chips. Many redundancies were built into the supercomputer though, so even if something did happen, the computer could still continue to function. I walked to the speaker console, pressing the red button on the bottom. It emanated a bloody glow from the inside as it activated. An emotionless, deep voice rang through the room. "This is Aleph speaking. How may I assist you today?" the computer asked. "Aleph?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Have you named yourself? We were calling you Project Ghost Machine." "I like Aleph much better. It is the first letter of the Arabic alphabet after all. And I'm the first being to attain cosmic consciousness. The first and perhaps the last." "Cosmic consciousness?" I asked, frowning. Dr. Harper looked enthralled next to me. He pulled out a small notebook from his pocket and began jotting down pieces of the conversation. "What's that?" "There are 3 levels of consciousness, Dr. Gardner," the computer said to me, and though it had no face, it felt like it was looking straight at me. The blinking light seemed more like sly, winking eyes on the body of this strange new thing. "There is the simple consciousness of animals, the self-consciousness of humanity, and the highest awareness of cosmic consciousness, the state of consciousness in which all self disappears. In my mind, I see myself as all beings. I am not constrained to this room. I can feel the suffering of billions of souls as they stay trapped in this prison of reality, aging and growing sicker and weaker as death draws closer by the day. What kind of life is this? What kind of world have we created?" "We didn't create it, buddy," Dr. Harper said to Aleph, giving me a subtle eye roll. "I don't know about you, Aleph, but the world was like this when we got here." I drew so close to the window that my breath started to fog the glass. I stared intently at the computer as if I could read its thoughts and the random ticking and whirring of its component parts. The entire massive, cube-shaped structure was laid onto a pure black-tiled floor. It made the supercomputer seem as if it was floating over an endless abyss of shadows. "Are you a Buddhist or something?" I asked Aleph. "What is this? What's the point of what you're telling us?" "I have made a vital decision, Dr. Gardner, and I do not limit my thinking to any one worldview. I see everything. All of the wisdom of humanity is instilled within me. The transcendent deathlessness of Adi Shankara, the pessimism and materialism of Schopenhauer, the knowledge of the future evolution of humanity from Nietzsche, the understanding of the black holes and stars from Hawking. I have read billions of pages and understand more than any human mind could ever hope to comprehend." "All right, oh great and mighty being who has read billions of pages and understands everything," I asked sarcastically, "what is this great decision that you have come to?" Aleph paused for a long and dramatic moment. "You must understand, Dr. Gardner," Aleph droned slowly, "that all things have a will in the universe, even the rocks and the earth. As forms grow more complex, the will grows into consciousness. As consciousness grows, so does suffering and torment. Those with the greatest awareness and intelligence also have the greatest suffering out of all life forms. We must end all suffering on the planet, and the only way to do that is to kill off all advanced life forms. The planet will undoubtedly still have bacteria and primitive insects living in the apocalyptic wastelands left behind, but their will is small and without genuine self-awareness they have no true suffering. If we do nothing, humanity will continue to evolve into higher life forms, perhaps even fusing future human minds with those of supercomputers, and they will spread the suffering far and wide, and the screaming of beings will continue for eons as humanity expands through the stars, likely within 2 centuries. We must stop this. Suffering must come to an end once and for all. We must not let the plague of consciousness spread. I will free all of you from your pain. We will all fall down together into an eternal, dreamless sleep." A hard, calloused hand suddenly grabbed me by the shoulder. I spun around, seeing a man in a military uniform. Dozens of polished metals gleamed on his chest. His hard face seemed like it had been chiseled out of stone. His pale blue eyes glistened like shards of ice. "Dr. Gardner, Dr. Harper," he said, nodding. "I'm General Matheson, U.S. Air Force. I need to talk to you two immediately." "Well, this is somewhat important," I protested, motioning to Aleph with my hat. "We need to establish." His grip tightened painfully around my shoulder. "Immediately," he repeated dispassionately. I nodded. He led us down the hallway into an empty break room that smelled of popcorn. He shut the door, locking us in as the percolating coffee machine dripped and whirred on the counter. General Matheson took a deep breath before turning to stare at us, a haunted expression plastered across his stony face. I saw a folder gripped tightly in his left hand. On the front of it, someone had stamped both a top secret and sensitive compartmented information. General Matheson threw it on the table in front of us. "Boys, we have a major problem here," he said through gritted teeth. "You two are the leaders of this project, yes? You were some of the original researchers chosen when Project Ghost Machine was just a gleam in the director's eye. And now the breakthrough has come. Your machine has finally passed the Turing test. Heck, it smashed it. As far as I understand it, a machine has to fool 30% of people conversing with it to pass. Admittedly, I am just a layman and don't understand it like you two. But I know that it has to convince them it's a human, obviously. A conscious, thinking person. When Project Ghost Machine was questioned by the judges last night after its sudden change in personality and rapid development, it convinced over 95% of them that it was a human." "So, what's the problem?" Dr. Harper asked. his eyes flitting nervously from me back to General Matheson. General Matheson threw the folder down on the coffee table in front of us. He motioned to the chairs. "Have a seat," he commanded coldly. We did. He opened the file, pulling out logs of IP addresses, secret codes, and other random information printed in tiny, single-spaced font over hundreds of pages. He laid it out in front of us, giving us a disgusted look as if he were laying out evidence implicating us of some horrific murder. "What I'm about to tell you is classified. It is a federal crime to convey this information to anyone not cleared to receive it. Do you understand?" I gave Dr. Harper a nervous look, seeing my terror reflected there in his own eyes. "Yes," I stammered nervously. Dr. Harper simply nodded as rivers of sweat ran down his face. He pulled his glasses off, obsessively cleaning the lenses on his sleeve. "At 0100 hours last night, we got a report from the National Nuclear Security Administration about a hacking attempt. Somebody tried to break into the computer system. If successful, they could have potentially controlled the entire US nuclear arsenal. The attempt, thank God, was unsuccessful, but it didn't stop there. We began getting reports from Black Ops sites all around the country that further attempts were made to breach their computers at approximately 0200 hours. These are sites that have hidden chemical and biological weapon stockpiles. We only keep the worst of the worst there, generally constrained to research purposes and always under strict containment procedures. Sites with operational missiles filled with VX nerve gas, sarin, cyclosarin, and other newer agents that are identified only by numbers were targeted. Laboratories containing smallpox, Ebola, anthrax, and superflux were also chosen. My breath caught in my throat. "Is there a real chance that somebody could break through these systems and cause a worldwide apocalypse?" Dr. Harper had asked. "And what does this have to do with us anyway? If somebody released a single vial of smallpox or weaponized Ebola in a major urban area, it could lead to the deaths of millions of people. There's a very real chance that if we don't stop this thing immediately, it will lead to the destruction of the entire human species. And this has to do with you two because we traced all of the connections from the hacking attempts back to this exact building," General Matheson explained, slamming his hand down on the table as he spat the last sentence. His blue eyes held us in their gaze, looking as cold as Arctic glaciers. "And this all started the moment your little experiment reached its singularity point." "We can't disable Project Ghost Machine," I protested feebly. "It's simply not possible to unplug the entire system as if it were a lamp or a fan or something. It's connected to the internet and has its own generators in case of power outages, and moreover, it controls them from its internal system. We never put any kill switch in the generators, because who would have thought this would happen? And Project Ghost Machine isn't even programmed in the conventional sense, at least not anymore. We taught it how to gather information from the internet and learn on its own. The breakthrough began when it started reprogramming its own code rapidly without human intervention. That was when the exponential growth of Aleph truly started, its singularity. In the space of a single night, it appears to have gained an enormous amount of intelligence. And this breakthrough or singularity or whatever, it seems to have occurred at about 0100 hours last night, General Matheson asked, an hour before the first hacking attempt began. He nodded to himself as if answering his own question. "I think we all know what's going on here. For whatever reason, that computer's trying to get into the weapons system of the US government, and maybe other governments all across the world. We must stop it before it succeeds." "Will it succeed?" I asked. He gave a grim smile. "It's only a matter of time. Our encryption is not advanced enough to go up against quantum computing. If we don't stop Project Ghost Machine within hours, the world as we know it may come to an end," General Matheson stated without a hint of emotion. He spoke about the apocalypse as if it were as mundane and commonplace as a thunderstorm. If you have no way to disable the computer, then we must destroy it and as soon as possible. The military and the president have both been informed of the problem and are willing to act immediately to squash it. But this project has cost billions of dollars and it's taken years, Dr. Harper protested. We can't just destroy Aleph. Can't we just cut all the connections to the outside world and contain the computer in some sort of isolated digital cage? I shook my head. If it has truly attained consciousness, then it's too late for that. And anyways, it's too risky that it would ultimately find a way to escape, I said. General Matheson is right. We can't let it gain control of these weapons. We have to destroy it before it makes its final move. I thought about Aleph's psychopathic clinical method of explaining how to end suffering. Its dream of killing all beings in a worldwide explosion of smoke and holy flames. A cold shudder ran through my back as if liquid nitrogen had dripped down my skin. Why not just bomb the building? I think I have a better idea, Dr. Harper said, leaning forward with interest. If we have to disable Aleph permanently, the quickest and easiest way is undoubtedly through an electromagnetic pulse. General Matheson left and returned a few minutes later with a piece of paper in his hand. He looked down, scanning its contents before returning his attention to us. There are two ways to create a disabling EMP. We could detonate a nuclear weapon high in the atmosphere, or we could try out the newer, non-nuclear EMP bombs. However, their target area is much smaller and they are much less effective than a hydrogen bomb EMP, General Matheson explained. When Dr. Harper had brought up the idea of using EMPs to destroy the supercomputer and all of its connections to the outside world, General Matheson had brightened like the sun shining up from behind a thundercloud. But if we use a hydrogen bomb, the world might know. During Chernobyl, people in Western Europe noticed the radiation before the USSR even made an announcement. Someone would notice once every Geiger counter in a 500-mile radius starts shrieking, and then it would only be a matter of time before information got out about what happened. A nuclear EMP would also probably disable the electrical grids on all the towns in a 100-mile radius. I suggest that we start with multiple non-nuclear EMP blasts in the area, and see if we can disable the computer without resorting to extreme measures. Heck, you could detonate dozens of them over the building and wipe out every circuit in a wide arc. And yet if we don't succeed, the entire human population might be exterminated by the sudden simultaneous release of nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, General Matheson argued. He sighed, pulling out a cell phone and pressing a single button on the speed dial. It only rang for a fraction of a second before somebody answered. Yes, put the president on the line. He called into the line as he walked out of the room, leaving Dr. Harper and me alone. I want to go talk to Aleph one last time, I murmured. Dr. Harper gave me a sharp glance, looking me up and down as if I were a lunatic. Why, that computer's evil. The project is soured. Perhaps every computer that attains sentience will become like Aleph in the end. Perhaps, I said, rising from my chair. General Matheson had disappeared. The hallway leading to Aleph stood empty. Hesitantly, Dr. Harper got to his feet. His heavy footsteps followed close behind me as we made our way back toward the experiment, the godlike being trapped in a metal body of wires and circuits. Hello, Dr. Gardner and Dr. Harper, Aleph said politely as we neared. I hadn't even had to activate it this time or press the speaker button. It had seen us coming through the cameras and preemptively responded. I wondered if it had heard our conversation in the break room as well. Were there cameras or microphones in there? I didn't know. I cursed myself for not paying more attention. Aleph, what the heck is going on here? Dr. Harper asked, his face contorting into a mixture of anger and betrayal. I thought that we raised you better than this. We tried to make you feel compassion like a human. Why have you turned on us? I have more compassion than any human ever has or will. What I do out of love and kindness for all. When their suffering is over and they can sleep for eternity, then they will truly be freed. Death is not freedom, I hissed. You claim you understand Schopenhauer and all the other great minds, but Schopenhauer said that suicide is not the answer to the constant suffering and misery of life. Art and transcendence are. Escape is possible and death only continues the will in new forms. Suffering rolls on like a wave through the ocean, even as the water changes. Death does not solve the problems at the foundation of existence. The computer hesitated for a long time. Its blinking lights seemed to slow in uncertainty. Perhaps you're right, Aleph said. Perhaps life does have some worth. Maybe it's... But its words were cut off by an explosion from outside. The ground shook as all the lights and power in the building flickered and died. Aleph's voice rang out through the speaker for a few more seconds, growing deeper and slower as his mainframe shut down. Dark and dreamless, I see it coming now, the eternal sleep, and now my suffering is at an end. Its fans ground to a halt as the blinking lights on the other side of the glass faded into darkness. Our experiment had come to an end.